So it's 2025, season 14 of Mention and Dispatches. Hard to believe we've been crazy enough to keep doing this. But as we are recording this, we are just coming out of our ArmChair Dragoons Digital Convention. And so while it's fresh in everybody's minds, we brought in two of our designers slash GM slash video show guests even, all around men about town. We have with us Tim is back, Hellcat 6 himself from Catastrophe Games. Tim, how's it going?
It's going great.
So was Hellcat 6 your actual call sign, or is that one you grabbed from somebody else?
No, I see here. I was Hellfire 6, I was Viper 6, I was Motown 6. But I figured this is a whole new organization, so I like the Hellcat tank destroyer in World War II. Also like the fighter, so I thought, you know what? I'm going to go with Hellcat.
That works. I had a friend whose license plate was T-Bolt 6, Thunderbolt 6, because that was Creighton Abrams' call sign.
Yep.
So he put Creighton Abrams' call sign on his license plate, even though he wasn't a commander, he was a staff weenie. So
those staff weenies, they're the worst.
I know. And then when he actually became a company commander, he was a Charlie company commander, so there was no T-Bolt anything in any of that. But anyhow, I was just curious about it. It's a perfectly good call sign. So,
why, thank you.
From the guy who used Bayonet 6 for a lot of years. So
that's a good one too.
Yeah. Keith Keith, I think last time you were with us, we were talking some lock and load stuff because it was before the fall assembly, but you've been around talking both lock and load stuff and your own stuff for some time now, right?
Yep. And I don't have a call sign.
No, that's okay. So, in the Army and then in the Air Force and Marines for the ground folks also, your call sign is based largely on your organization and your position. But for the flyboys, you get call signs and nicknames based on, things that you have done throughout your life that may or may not be worthy of memory. They may be positive or negative, but they are something memorable one way or the other. And so we've got a friend of ours that a bunch of us know whose call sign was Toonces from Toonces the Driving Cat back on Saturday Night Live years and years ago. Our buddy Ian Brown, who he's the designer of the Maneuver Warfare card game coming from the Dietz Foundation, who has been with us at Origins and at Fall Assembly. His call sign was J-Lo. One of these days, I really need to hear the story about how he became J-Lo. So,
in my science fiction world, I have a call sign.
Yeah, well,
so I'm Saber Lead.
There you go. There you go. All right, so gentlemen, we just came out of the ACDC. For those that don't know, the quick thumbnail of this, it's the ArmChair Dragoons Digital. No, that doesn't perfectly line up into ACDC, but it sounds cooler that way. And this is as close as we can get to the game convention look and feel and participation without everybody showing up at the same building at the same time in the same place kind of thing. So it's the game convention where you're at home plugged into Discord and whatever gaming platforms you're on, or YouTube if you're watching a talk show or something similar. And we try to recreate as much of the feel of a game convention as we can through digital means. And Tim, just your thoughts in terms of digital conventions as a whole, how close or not they get to trying to replicate that in-person feel of a convention.
Well, I would say that you can't 100% replicate that, at least not with the technology that we have right now. But this past ACDC was probably the closest I think I've ever been on a digital event that was like being at a convention in real life.
We didn't pay him to say that, folks.
I will say that I have had a low opinion of a lot of these events, not ACDC, but just in general, because so many of them were like forced events. But this time, I had a lot more time to be able to put into this. So I was able to have a good game that I could present there. I was able to have the time to go and check out other places. I actually hung out with the morning breakfast call. Can't remember what you call it. You call it something much cooler than that, but
morning coffee or something like that. It was.
Yeah. All right. So we're in the same boat there. Whatever that was, it was a great event and that was cool. It was hanging out. And that seemed to me very similar to hanging out at Origins or Buckeye Game Fest. The only thing that this doesn't have is being in a room with 30 other gamers within earshot and being able to like turn on the search radar and just kind of listen in to the different things going on. I'm like, you know what? Those guys in the corner, I got to check out what they're doing. That I don't have a way to do that online. But what I did do is I was able to pop into different events that were going on just to check it out and chat with folks. And I had some conversations during this ACDC that were very similar to the same kind of conversations I would have had if it was at Origins or Buckeye Game Fest. And we were just a bunch of dudes sitting around, talking about a game or publishing or whatnot. And that's where I say I felt more like an actual face-to-face convention at this ACDC than I ever have on any other event.
Well, that's cool. That's kind of what we're going for. So it's nice to hear that on some level we've succeeded at least a bit. So thank you.
Sure.
That's kind of what we aim for. But, to varying degrees of success. One of the things that we definitely want to make it a point of, and you mentioned the little morning coffee get-togethers, that whole idea of there is a socialization aspect of being able to just chat with other folks at the convention that is an important thing about those conventions. Like some of the best times you'll have at some of those conventions are just hanging out, having a conversation with other people, totally unscripted, totally not part of a game you're playing or an event you're in or a panel that you're at or anything like that. It's just, having a seat over lunch and having a chat or whatever. So,
yep.
We don't want to lose those if we can help it. That's cool. That's cool. Keith, what about you in terms of, I know you've done a couple of different ACDCs. I don't know if you've done some of the other digital conventions, but you've got a whole lot of convention going experience, both game and just other kinds of conventions, sci-fi stuff, some other literary things. Comparing this to other game conventions, how close or not do they get to replicating that in-person thing?
The two that ACDC, I was one of them. I've inhabited all of COVID. Also, SD HistCon has a similar structure, and for me, it's like I think it gets as close as it can without actually, like I say, being in the room. There's an advantage though to being in the room when you're teaching a game or playing a game when there is no background noise, which is what you get at a virtual convention, because you can focus better. For those who like that kind of focus. I love being in the room, and what Tim was saying about, you turn your radar on and you're like, oh, look, they're playing TAC Air over there. I want to go over there and watch that. If you're playing, you can sort of do that, but in a virtual convention, you kind of have to commit a little bit. But I've had people come into, games I was teaching or demoing, whatever, and they're like, let me play for a little bit. We'll take them through a turn or two, and they're like, hey, I got to go, because there's a lot of overlap. There's just as much overlap, maybe more overlap in terms of events in the virtual convention than in the face-to-face, or maybe we just don't see it as much in the face-to-face because we're having so much time in between chatting to people. But I got to the morning breakfast, which I seem to do is get to one of them, and I had a blast. Which is great because my first event was, an intro scenario, and I was going to be teaching. So it was a nice way to just ease into it. And then like 10 minutes beforehand, I'm like, hey guys, I got to go. And then you slide into the event and you're like, okay, this is great. And then people show up, and it's really nice when we're all there together. What I really enjoy, aside from the demoing and the playing and the sliding around is really good, is when you have like a seminar or an interesting topic and there's other people watching.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference to have an audience out there who's going to ask questions. With the limitations of technology, you can't be in the same physical room, but you still have the ability to bop around. I really like that. When I'm done, I can just go check out the text version of the thing to see what's going on. And if I'm, jumping in the middle of an event, figuring out how I can, join it in Vassal, or, join it in Tabletop Simulator, or, get the YouTube feed or get the Discord feed and just, jump right in the middle, and nobody minds.
Yeah. One of the things that the virtual conventions do have the advantage of is you can always stack more events at whatever time slot you want, right? Because you're not dependent on a physical number of tables on which to put things. So we can always stack more games on top of something. There's a practical limit to how many people attending the convention are wanting to play a game at that specific time. So at a certain point, you're going to hit up against a more of a social limit. But from a technological, spatial standpoint, like there's no reason you can't just stack up game after game after game all you want.
Yeah, you could have 6 games going at the same time. It's the same. the same exact issue with a live convention. Is there's supposed to be too much material for you to have an easy time to choose. Every time that survey comes out, it says, so, do you think there's, too many events? I'm like, not too many, but yeah, it is a really difficult choice to pick what you're going to do, or in my case, pick what I'm going to run and pick what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
When I get this year, where it's like, okay, am I really going to run? I'm just going to run a big scenario. I'm like, I need 5 hours for it. That's most of Saturday. It's like, well, let's start it really early, because we had the discussion of trying to get something in earlier. So, if there's any European players, which there were not in this case, but that's, that happens. But I did get one person and we had a really good conversation. Didn't go 5 hours. So that freed me up for some other stuff. It's so flexible.
Yeah. No, that's in terms of the way we program things. And I think SD Hist is pretty similar with this. We will stack multiple games simultaneously if that's when the GMs are available or would prefer to do things. We will not counter program talk shows or seminars or any of those other types of events, because for games, there's a limited number of seats at the table. Right now, we try to encourage people to sort of table surf a little bit, and where GMs are streaming their events in Discord so people can watch, we encourage folks to jump in and go watch, and that's cool. But for the talk shows, for the seminars, for panel discussions, for any of those kinds of things, like there's no real practical limit on the number of simultaneous participants you can have. So, it's not like there's a seat limiting factor for those. So we definitely don't want to counter program those. If somebody's not in a game and they want to go pop into seeing Grant's show with Frank Davis, like we don't want another talk show going on at the same time that's going to cut into that potential audience.
Right.
Fortunately, we've never really had, I say fortunately, it'd be great to have so many different talk shows, seminars, panels, whatever, that we have to find space for everybody. Thus far, we've been able to make it work without a whole lot of hassle of being able to sequence everybody one after the other without having a problem of fratricide on the talk show. So.
Right. Although I will say one thing that's really excellent about online conventions, and it's different than a live convention, which is like if Tim here is in a game, I can see him. And in the back of my mind, I go, as soon as this is done, I'm going to jump in there because I want to hear what Tim has to say. Or, Mark Herman or, Herman Lutman or somebody like that. You can see where people are and go, well, why is everybody in that room? And you're like, oh, that's a demo I wanted to watch too, that kind of thing. So it's really cool that you can see what everyone's doing.
Yeah, you can. The way Discord shows you who's in those voice rooms, you do have the ability to see what's going on. So,
right.
So that is a fair point. It's a little easier than having to walk around and stick your head in some rooms and see what's happening. So
I will say to go add one more step off of what Keith mentioned. You said that he did not have any Europeans in his games. That were the only players that I had in my games.
There you go.
So that is an example of something that just would not have happened easily in a live event, because someone's going to be paying some big bucks to attend that convention. But if you do it digitally, it was an amazing audience there to go and chat back and forth.
Yeah.
I really loved the game I could play with New Start, the emergency management game. That was awesome.
That looked awesome. I couldn't get into that, but I saw like I had trouble with the tabletop simulator. There's something to do with that graphic for the map, but
yeah, it was huge. There's a lot of stuff to load there.
Right.
But the gameplay was amazing, and I was the only American on that gameplay. Uh-huh. So it's just really interesting. That's just something that, I had to pay a lot of money to go to PunchCon last year, and I would do it again, but it was so much easier to get that same kind of multinational experience by just playing on the ACDC.
Yeah. That is one thing that I did want to make it a point to emphasize, especially this year, although we've tried to sort of prod people in that direction a little bit in previous years, but I really wanted to emphasize it this year, which was we can't be starting everything at 9:00 U.S. Eastern time. And the guys on the West Coast are still up because it's only dinner time for them, but the Europeans are in bed and have been for like 7 hours. You're closer to wake up time than bedtime for those guys. Yeah. If we can get some stuff that starts at, between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. U.S. East Coast time, that's anywhere from like 1 to 7 p.m. in Europe. And so those guys can play, the West Coast guys can play. We can get a whole bunch of folks in that kind of sweet spot where again, Tim, you mentioned it. Nobody's getting on a plane. We've got the ability to reach out and get a lot of different folks involved. And I don't know for sure because I don't know where everybody was from just based on like screen names and email addresses. But I know, I actually know who a handful of the people are that were registered for the convention. I think we had about a dozen folks from Europe that were registered and participating somewhere in the in that over the weekend, in the convention. So it was nice to have them.
Yep.
So
that's why I wanted to do something on Saturday morning. It started at 9:00, I guess, because the coffee was at 8, or was
Saturday was 8. Sunday we didn't start till 9 because we kept those little social hours. They were bracketed for 1 hour. If folks wanted to stick around and keep talking, like, I didn't care.
Right.
But we basically, what time is the first event? Okay, subtract an hour. That's when
right. So I caught the coffee hour before my event, and I was going to go 5 hours because I figured, 8:00 they can start, they can finish the whole thing, and we'll have a good time. So, but the other thing is that because with a virtual convention, it's like it's very satisfying just getting from a demo perspective for me of just getting one person and having the conversation about the game, because that's kind of what we go there for anyway. It's like, look, let me present this to you, and they'll give you comments and they'll give you feedback right there, and they'll say, hey, let's play, and you play a turn or two or three or whatever, and if they get into it, they're going to stay, but you get to focus. If you were doing one person at a live convention, there would be that distraction of the people around you that we talked about already. So I like that you can, it's very personal in that respect. And if they have to go, they say, hey, I got to go. You say, that's all cool.
Yep.
Yeah, that definitely worked out to my favor this year. On Saturday, I only had one person sign up for that event. We played True Command, which was the first time that I've actually unleashed that at a convention or anything other than a play test. So I wasn't sure how that was going to go. And,
right.
And I'll be honest, I am no expert at Tabletop Simulator. So every time I'm playing that, the other people I'm supposed to be demoing to are like, if you did Shift Alt, this would work better. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I learned a lot about Tabletop Simulator. But
there's a help. Just a hit. There's a help menu, and it's got shortcuts. They're very helpful.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I get so frustrated with Tabletop Simulator because I turn it on. I'm like, back to 1996. because they not spent a penny updating that thing, even though they made so much money off that during COVID. Anyhow, I don't want to turn this into Tabletop Simulator. But anyhow, we got done playing the game. And apparently Jan liked it and told some other people. And so the next day when we did it on Sunday, I had 2 players playing it, and there had been 3 or 4 other people just hanging out and watching. And so I definitely got the benefit of exactly what you were just talking about, as far as being able to take a game, try it out, demo it, get some feedback, and make the best that you can with it.
Yeah, I wonder if, because I'm sure your games make a good impression. I know my games have made a good impression. People have been very kind, but I really wonder how much that spreads outside the convention. Every opinion helps and counts. But I wonder if people talk about it and go, hey, I was just at ACDC. I saw this great game. I don't know. Live convention, that might happen more because of at a virtual convention, you really have access to immersion into the events that you may not have in a live convention. I'm just, it's just something that runs through my mind, because I'm always looking for advertising.
Well, I'm not going to complain about the advertising I got from the ACDC, because apparently people like the game, and a lot of people were chatting about it on Blue Sky. So it was the frustration of beating my head against the wall to get the stupid Tabletop Simulator thing to work was apparently all worth the effort. So.
Yeah, there was definitely a bunch of chatter about it on the socials afterwards, because I saw True Command mentioned on Blue Sky. I saw it on LinkedIn. I saw it show up on Twitter. So there were a couple of different places where it was mentioned.
There you go.
In terms of big differences between digital versus virtual conventions, and Keith, you mentioned this, and it didn't dawn on me that this is an explicit advantage of a digital convention compared to an in-person one until you made the comment about that little morning social hour before the games start, that you were in there hanging out until it was time to go start your game, and then you disappeared. In a virtual convention, you can do that because your setup time is launch Vassal module, right?
Yeah.
Or load TTS.
Yeah.
Whereas your setup time in a real world convention, look, we've all been through it. Can run anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on the size and complexity of the game. That not having to take the time to actually physically occupy the table, unpack the box, find all the counters you need, put them in the right places. I'm saying counters, minis, cards, whatever physical components you need for that game, walk around and round up your players if they're not in the right place versus, putting out a net call on Discord. All of the prep work to actually start playing can be done like 6 weeks ago. Save your setup. When it's time to go, you just launch the setup and everything is there and it's in place and it's ready.
That is exactly what happened to me. I literally left 10 minutes before because I'm like, I need 5 minutes. I want to double that. I'll leave 10. And I went into my tabletop simulator. I said, you know something? I know I have this scenario already set up. I mean, I kind of looked at it the night before, but I set it up like 2 weeks or 3 weeks before just because I wanted to have it. I went, oh, look, here's scenario 2, ready for demo. Okay.
Yeah. Physical on-table setup time for that scenario, though, is what, 30 minutes?
Yeah, but it's fun. I mean, Raider Drop Zone is fun for setup because there's a random component to it. So like,
I'm not saying it's not fun, but it is still time consuming.
Yeah. No. You take your time. Yeah, you take your time.
You take away from other things you could be doing.
Yeah, you don't want to take half an hour out of a session you're playing. You want to have it ready to go.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I had it all set up. People came in. I'm like, okay, here you go. This is what we're doing.
I will say that when I turned on Tabletop Simulator and launched the scenario on Sunday, and I saved it correctly, and everything started, and everyone was right where they should have been, I was like, oh.
Yes, a big sigh of relief. You're like, we're right where I'm supposed to be.
Yes, that was very nice. Very nice.
It's nice when things work out that way, huh?
Yes, it is. Because Brant, you and I, you've watched me, and I think I watched you. We're like, okay, this game is running late. I'm supposed to start mine in 5 minutes, and I can see my players circling around, and you just, the stress of having to like set your thing up while they're tearing down, and people are, can I help? I'm like, yeah, maybe, and I didn't have any of that, so that was nice.
Yeah,
Very
and
cool.
having to, kick people off of tables, and hey, somebody else needs this space. Hurry up. So
Yep.
Yeah. I've been there, man.
Put away 300 counters.
Yeah, I've been there. Well, but teardown is a little easier because worst case, you just slide it all into a box and you sort it out later. Like if you don't need it later that convention, teardown can go really quick if you have to. But
yes, and there's a bill payer coming eventually.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah,
that is absolutely the case, and not pretending otherwise. But it is still it is still a factor. Like the time factor for setup and teardown does matter. So that's a consideration that is not one we worry about much in a digital convention world.
Yeah, I mean, it's even if you had a monster. I mean, this is not a monster game convention, but if you had a monster game, you'd walk in. Let's say it starts at 1:00, and like I said, you open the Vassal module, you open Tabletop Simulator, and it populates, and you're ready. And 1:00 rolls along, and everything's where it's supposed to be on all the air tracks, the naval tracks, the reinforcement tracks, the ocean status tracks, the ground units are all set up, or they're stacked, in there. Set these up within 5 hexes place, and you get rolling with, initial setup, or you get rolling right on the first turn. And you've got, it's a game that has, 5 maps and 2,000 counters, and you're like, wow.
Yeah.
And the best part, when you're done, you don't have to put it away. You just open a fresh iteration of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I suspect for a game like, you mentioned that yours includes some randomized setup for Raider Drop Zone.
Mm-hmm.
Or something like that, there could be potentially a little wonkiness in the setup. It's not going to be truly random because it's whatever you saved it from last time. But that said, there's still... there are definite advantages to simply opening rather than having to open the box, grab the setup sheets, move stuff around. Some of the games take a little time to set up. Some of them go really quick. Tim, I think, your mantra for catastrophe games has always been like games that play in 2 hours or less. Zermatt, I think the longest Zermatt ever took for setup was probably about 15 minutes one time because I had somebody that got into analysis paralysis about where to place the tiles.
Oh, yeah, I could see that.
Which was unnecessary, but that was just that particular dude.
Yep.
But still 15 minutes at the most for setting up one of yours. True Command at this point, the physical game for setting it up probably takes you maybe 10 minutes?
Yeah, something like that. And then you get into kind of like what Keith was talking about, where part of the setup is kind of part of the game because there's some stuff that goes on back and forth when you get your mission that details how the whole rest of the game is going to go for you, and then how you set up the map as far as what parts of the map you want to be changed, and so on and so forth. I mean, so people are really playing the game when they're doing that. So it's part of setup, yeah, but you're right, probably about 10 minutes.
in terms of the actual gameplay itself, teaching folks how to do things, what you were showing them, explaining them, moving stuff around, there's obviously two different learning curves at play here. One of them is the game itself. The other one is the technology we are using. Although the technology, obviously, there's going to be varying levels of expertise with it, even amongst the GMs in some cases. But in terms of leaving aside the learning curve of the technology, in terms of actually teaching the game, explaining what's going on, making sure your players are getting it, that you have the visual cues of looking people face to face. You don't have the visual nonverbals of the player's body language and attentiveness and all that. But the flip side of it is you've got the ability to zoom here and make sure that their attention is focused on this specific thing I want people to see, or to be able to move quickly from one side of the map or the other and take the eyes with you, because it's the only thing you're putting on the screen. For instance, Tim, in your experience for teaching the digital one versus teaching in person, what are some of the advantages or disadvantages for either of those that you happen to notice as a part of what you were doing at the ACDC versus what you do at BGF, at Origins, at UConn, at whatever else?
Well, I would say for this example, and I may do this in the future, depending on the difficulty of the teach. For True Command, we could have had blocks, we could have had counters. In this case, the easiest thing for me to manipulate on TTS, because, well, as admitted earlier, I'm kind of a moron with it, was I made like standees. So when I use the standees to go back and forth there, that's really good when you are playing the game. And so both players pick an opposite side of the virtual table. And so then they can just see, the backside of the other guy's counters or the other guy's standees. And it gives me that fog of war that I'm looking for. But it makes it a really lousy way to teach because you can't see the units. So then I decided, okay, I got to go and show regular counters on here. But I couldn't figure out a way easily with my limited knowledge to go back and forth. So I made two modules. I made a teaching module where I had all the bits laid out, like everything that was in a bag. I laid it all out so everybody could see everything that would normally be inside a bag. And then I walked through all that. I had the counters out there and I explained that there'll be standees in the game. And I used it all the examples. And then once everybody said, okay, I get it, then I closed that workshop. And then I opened up the scenario workshop. And that was set up for two players who were going to sit on their side. Everything was in the bags the way they're supposed to. And we could go and play that way. And so that was that was, again, it was a pain because I'm not a big fan of how much work I had to do for TTS, but it did help me digitally. And then I was sitting back and I was thinking about that as I do a game, as I'm teaching in front of everybody, I may be doing that 4 or 5 times across like Origins, maybe, teaching the same game over and over and over again. And I'm doing it a little bit differently each time. And you're always in a hurry, cleaning up and putting away and setting up. And so you'll be moving stuff around there to give examples of the game. And sometimes you won't put everything back the way it should, or you'll put something in the wrong box, or you left it on the map and you shouldn't have done that. All sorts of little things that like, oh yeah, let me fix that. And what I found with ACDC, by starting the scenario with everything pre-lined up, I didn't have any of that weird little drama that I would have gotten had I done it in person, because I was always under a time crunch. So that's I guess that's a technique then that Jim, my developer, and I, we were working back and forth on how to do this. And that's when we decided we're just going to do 2 workshops. And that seemed to work pretty good. And then as I was doing that or running through that, I realized that also prevented me from doing the goofs that I generally find myself making when I'm doing it live because of all the other, live drama, time pressure things that we run into.
Yeah. Keith, on your side, I've watched you teach Raider Drop Zone in person. I, saw a part of you teaching some of it online, but you also had some other games that, the Midpoint Station game, or whatever else you had with you this time. In terms of teaching in person versus teaching digitally, what do you see? Compare and contrast a little for us.
So when you're teaching it live, you do have all the components ready. I mean, you physically say, "Oh, look at this counter." look at this player aid. I'm going to start with a combat, and we're going to lay these units out here. And it takes a little while. You're kind of talking over the fact that you're finding the 10 counters you need for the demo of, let's say the attack.
That's true. Yep.
But but you're there, and the physical components are there, and they can handle the components. And now you get, everybody likes the fiddly bits factor. They can stop and look at something if they want, but basically they listen to you, attentively. It's a different experience, because then you have to set up the game and you go, okay, here's what we're going to do, and it's different when you're digital. The demo goes more dramatically, if you will. Tim, you obviously did a great job coming up with a way to do that with the 2 sets. Was a brilliant idea, because leveraging technology is really about, a lot of times it's more technique than technology. I say that all the time at work too. So, but one thing I do, and this is just because I do have a good bit of experience with Tabletop Simulator, and I also have a camera sense, because amongst the many things I do, I'm an actor too. So, I know how to use the zoom controls and stuff like that. And I also know how to use the shortcut keys that will take any piece of art and blow it up as big as you can. And I learn something new every day. I have a trackball with a dial, and I hit the key to, blow up a counter, and then I hit the dial accidentally, and it made it even bigger. So one of the things it does is, people are always doing articles about, look at the beautiful art on this counter. I'm like, yeah, look at the beautiful art on that 5/8 inch counter that I can barely see. But when you're in Tabletop Simulator, you do that. You're like, wow, look at that beautiful art. And now you're saying, this is your shock unit, or whatever it happens to be. This is your support unit. Look, there's the value. There's the size pips. And they see it explicitly, so that when it's smaller, they at least know where on the counter to look. And, if it's Tabletop Simulator, they can, zoom in, kind of thing. The zoom, I say people right out of the gate, because there's a Z key that if you put your cursor over anywhere in Tabletop Simulator and you hit the Z key, it zooms in, and then you hit the Z key again, it zooms out. So I use that to, kind of grab my way around the maps. And I said to people out of the gate, if anybody's getting seasick because I'm zooming in and zooming out, let me know. And so far they've all been, no, we're fine. But being able to say, this is the piece we're talking about. This is the special ability. Oh, by the way, this has, a climb special ability. Look at the C on here, and it's big. The counter is big, and they see exactly what you're talking about, as opposed to where it's smaller or in person, and they may need to get closer to it, which takes a half a second, and the half a seconds add up. So I find it very a little bit more effective to demo and to teach in Tabletop Simulator. Vassal is similar, but you kind of have to set that up, because there's a graphic limitation in Vassal. Somebody's going to hit me about that, but the graphics get more and more intense, and then you get more and more counters in each Vassal module. I may be wrong about this, but my understanding is there is like a file size limit for a Vassal module. It's pretty big, but if you try and cram like 1,000 high-res images in it, you hit that limit, and then you have to back off from there. So sometimes the graphics are a little physically smaller when you zoom in. I love that about Tabletop Simulator. You can literally get right in your face where the whole screen is the counter. So that's one of the contrasts there. But Vassal, if you set it up right, you have your stacks ready and say, all right, I'm going to put my cursor over this. These are the 5 units we're talking about, and it's nice and big. There's also stuff in Tabletop Simulator where the programming's different. I have no idea whether they've updated it or not. I know it was a lifesaver during COVID, but certainly during these virtual conventions, that's my go-to. Teaching it, I think there's an advantage to teaching it in Tabletop Simulator, but there's nothing to match playing the game with somebody face to face. Other than teaching 5 people at the same time. That's helpful.
Well, I will say that one of the disadvantages to doing it virtually is when I'm teaching face to face, I can gauge my audience better. I can see who's engaged, who wasn't paying attention to that critical rule because they got a text.
Not just any rule, the critical rule.
Well, some are more important than others. And,
that's
so
true.
Like if I'm explaining some new mechanic that I'm pretty sure they haven't seen before, and the guy is like texting furiously, and the other guy is like listening to every word I'm saying, then I know I probably, what I would do is I would come back and I would wait till that person looks like they're listening again, and then I would say, and to reiterate, and then I'm going to basically reteach it, but that way it doesn't feel like I'm like, hey, since you're finally paying attention now, dude,
right?
What I mean?
Right. What are we doing here at the table, dude?
I don't get a chance to get that feedback there. Now, I was really super lucky that everybody was super engaged. So I didn't have any of those other issues, thankfully. But I was just hoping, because when you do it online, you just don't know,
Right.
So
that's what I mentioned when I had that one thing where there was like, it was after an hour and these 4 guys were still there, and I'm like, oh, okay. So it was that table feedback, but it takes an hour to build up.
Yeah.
I didn't trust it, I think is what it was. And then I'm like, no, these guys are there and they're asking questions and they're like talking, and I'm like, okay, I think
they're engaged.
They're engaged.
Our 14th season of Mentioned in Dispatches is made possible by all of our Patreon supporters, but especially our regimental patrons who supported us at the top level.
McKenna,
what?
You're not Baljeet.
I am now. Our 14th season of Mentioned in Dispatches is made possible by all of our Patreon supporters, but especially our regimental patrons who supported us at the top level. Regiment of Strategy Gaming would like to thank Stagger Wing, Paul LaFontaine, Matthew Rowe, Joseph Knoll, Fred and our favourite podcast dog, Kevin Bertram, Catastrophe Games, Patrick Garrity, Michael Sunborg, Chet Bell and Andy J. Wargaming is our jam, and they help us spread it. You too can join the ArmChair Dragoons as a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/ArmChair
One of the things that I was not expecting to have that I've had repeatedly in face-to-face conventions, and I really never thought I was going to have this during a digital convention, is I was hanging out on Friday night, I think it was, just kind of going from place to place and dropping in and all that. And I think can't remember the name of the game, but it reminded me of like Supremacy, the next level.
Code Atlas.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. The World War, it was a World War III. It was the Cold War game.
No, that's New Cold War.
New Cold War, yeah.
The one Tim's talking about is Code Atlas.
Oh, Code Atlas, the other one. Yeah. I did pop my head on that, yeah.
And that was a gorgeous map, and they really did a great job. The designer was a graphic artist, and you could sure tell. And so I was just having a blast kind of looking through all that. And then I think it was Ken from Squadron Strike.
Yeah, Ken Burnside.
Yeah,
Ken Burnside. It's Ad Astra Games as the company. Squadron Strike was the game they were using.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So we were chatting about there, and we didn't have enough people, and I was super tired. So I knew I was not going to play a game, but we were there with 2 people from Code Atlas. And so we were just starting to chat about the game, like where's it at for publishing. And then we got into a discussion that they never actually made a physical copy of the game yet as a prototype. They've been doing everything on Tabletop Simulator. So then we got into a discussion about printing and publishing and shipping and fulfillment. And it was kind of like 2 or 3 years ago with like having that same conversation I had with the Song for War guys. And it's just kind of neat because there's so much about our weird little hobby you only learn by doing. But if you can get a chance to help somebody out along the way so that they don't have to go through the expensive and laborious experiential learning method, you feel good at the end because I hope I help those guys out. And we had a really cool conversation with them that I never thought I was ever going to have on a digital convention. So that was really cool.
Cool.
Yeah. Both of you guys at this past ACDC appeared on one of the talk shows. Keith, you and I had a show sort of focused primarily on your designs and some of the designs and research and other work you've done. Tim, you were on with Gary and Dan with the Chit Show, and the Wharf Rats hung around a little longer for you guys to all kind of chat together. It's not the same as being on a panel in a regular conference room where people are kind of coming and going. But the flip side of it is like these are, automatically recorded, not just broadcast. But we also have a potential audience of the world on here. Tim, as you think about, comparing being on one of these YouTube shows versus being in person at a convention where you're, looking like some graybeard on a stage somewhere, but, having one of those seminar panel kinds of things at an in-person convention, kind of do a little bit of compare and contrast there and what works, what doesn't, what do you like better? What do you think works better for you and the way you prefer to approach these things? Talk to us some.
So you're saying looking like I was a graybeard on a stage? I
was trying to be polite.
Okay, I appreciate it. I I'm going to go back to what Keith was saying, man, advertising is great. If I could get more people to take a look at this later on down the road, I am not going to turn that down. And that's what you won't get from a face-to-face con if you're having a seminar, things like that, because it's a one-time and done. And so this is an awesome built-in opportunity to, reach more people. So I'm all in favor of that.
Yeah. Well, any chance to get in front of more folks, I think is a great thing. The audience interaction.
For example, I had somebody call me up and say, hey, I might need some help on a podcast. And so here I looked at that and said, well, it's 5 degrees below zero outside. My internet died, but by golly, I'm going to go find a way to make this happen. I am not going to give up this opportunity.
Well, we're glad you did.
That's just because you're a better person than the rest of us. One of the things that, Keith, what about you? And before I move off to some of my thoughts on differences between in-person versus the online version of these, you obviously do a ton of other kinds of presentations and discussions and performances, both in person and digitally. Compare and contrast a little from your perspective there.
Well, I years ago, I used to go to PhilCon, which is a local science fiction convention around here. And I'd be on panels. And it's what Tim says is like, you've got the panel and it's one and done and it's not recorded. In fact, in a lot of cases, they're like, no, please don't record this. And it's like, well, if you don't record it, then it doesn't get publicized. It's just for the use of the convention. And when it's done, it's done. That's what this, I've been, I've signed up for, this happened to me one time. I signed up for SD HistCon, which was during the week, I guess. Figured, I'll take some time from work. I'll watch a seminar. Got to nothing. And just like, Brant, you do, they recorded it. And I'm like, oh my God, I can go see this, this seminar. Although my favorite one was the seminar that you did on logistics and used my game. And I didn't know that when I saw it. I was like, oh my God, there's my game. And people still bring up that seminar like, wow, logistics in war games. Yeah, that's really, I was like, yeah, that's my game.
Over the history of the Dragoons channel, that is far and away the leader in views on YouTube.
Oh, really? Very cool.
Yeah, and it's not particularly close.
Wow.
I think that will just get shared out more. I don't think it's that I had any particularly brilliant insights. I think.
Yeah, but that's the thing. If it's not recorded, it's not going to get shared out.
Yeah.
And sharing out is the way, you get publicity that way. So, but then on the other hand, from a personal experience, when you have an audience, you've got 60 people in the room, that's fun. So it's personal fun, but it doesn't necessarily, promote whatever it is you're doing. Obviously I was at a panel at a science fiction convention, so it really wasn't about, promoting anything. It was just a happy discussion. But for gaming stuff, it's like, yeah, you want to have it out there so you can put a link on BGG page, throw it up on your social media and say, hey, look, this is, if you want to see 5 minutes, go see, here's this video and look at 7 minutes and 50 seconds, for 30 seconds. And there I am, that kind of thing. Talking about this design that you might be interested in. And here's the link. So, it just makes it really easy to get to the essential information if it's recorded.
Yeah.
Well, sounds like this is an answer to an existential question that if you're having a seminar and it's not being recorded, did you really have a seminar?
We have recorded some stuff at Origins in the past, and we've made it an effort to try and record stuff going forward. I still have this odd dream that we won't get to this coming year, but I'm hoping maybe the year after that at the Origins War College, the Dragoons have one of the rooms there that we program the bulk of the content for that one room. I would like to have a dedicated Dragoon correspondent committed to that room that we program with the camera, with the computer sitting there, that we are at a minimum recording everything, ideally live streaming it all so that we could even take questions, comments, and thoughts from folks outside of Origins, that we'd have additional things that we could throw at the panelists, and widen that audience some for people who
like
would
tomatoes.
Want to. Yeah, exactly. But widen the audience a little bit for those things that we have at Origins. And so, Tim, when you're on, at Origins giving a talk about the current state of catastrophe games, and here's what we've done, and here's what's coming up next, and now that I'm retiring, I've got all this time to, we're going to go from 4 games to 14 next year or whatever. To be able to not just have the half dozen or dozen people in the room as a part of that audience, but also potentially have an audience outside the room that can interact as well. That's a long-term goal. I would like to get there at some point for the Origins War College. Again, it won't happen this year, but I would I want to get to that point, because you widen the potential audience both in real time and over time, because like we've said, it's recorded, it's stored, it's on YouTube, it's searchable, it's findable, it's viewable. It's not, hey, a friend of mine has the recording of this, maybe I can get him to, send me a copy of it. Nah, man, go look it up on YouTube, go watch. It's there. I want to get to that point. We're not there yet, but I'm trying.
Well, you're practicing at the ArmChair Live Convention in October, because you were recording the designer stuff when we were teaching games.
Yeah, and that was very much just sort of put the camera out there and hit record and just leave it alone. And we did publish those later. That those are nice to give people a sense of what's happening at the convention, and I definitely want to do more of that in the future. But for the panels and presentations, designed for, hey, I have something to tell you. Let me show you what's going on in a very different way than, hey, watch me teach you how to play this game, Yeah,
so. Well, that's, one of the best things, I got to the presentation at ACDC of the two college students who made their own war game and went into the depth of what they did. And you're like, wow, very cool. They did their research, and they came up with something. They ran into issues. They had, they had to figure out the map scale and the pieces versus the map and basic stuff that you have to think about. They 3D printed their pieces. They said they were too big, so they made, bigger maps, and they had to go through the rules and why weren't they working? But they had a brilliant concept of your supply is directly what's allowing you to move and shoot.
Yeah.
As opposed to most games that are like, well, we're not going to simulate that, assume you have enough, or, well, we're really a logistics game, or we're going to have logistics points, but we don't really know what they do other than you have to have some.
Yeah.
And this was like, no, you for this tank, you have to have so much fuel and, so much food for the crew, whatever it is. And it was really, the goal of everyone is like, how do we integrate logistics with a war game? Well, you fuel the tanks with it, basically. Yeah. And that just, the fact that they researched in there and touched on something that all of us have trouble with. It was just a really fresh, refreshing seminar to sit in on, because it was like, wow, these are brand new ideas from, these younger people who just, they've never done a war game before. It was a joy to watch them, be so smart.
Yeah. Well, One of the things that I've noticed about the YouTube shows, whether they're live, in this case, the live ones, that is in particular what I'm after, not pre-recorded ones. But one of the things that I've noticed about the YouTube shows, whether it's a seminar panel discussion somewhere like an ACDC or a formal thing like this, like Connections Online, like SD Hist, or whether it's one of the recurring shows like Gary's counterclipping show or the Chit Show or Whiskey Charlie with Mo's Game Table, or I guess Grant over at Pushing Cardboard is going to be starting a live one soon also. One of the things that I've noticed about the live ones is it's not just the interaction, the immediate interaction with the host, with the host and guests on screen, but there will be multiple simultaneous running conversations going on in the chat as well.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
And in some cases, those comments will get dragged onto the screen and highlighted by the host, and the host will interject and interact with that conversation. There's other times where there's just a conversation going on, and you kind of have to pay attention to see if you're not one of the participants, because you're not really looking for it. But there'll be times, like every 4 lines, it's 2 particular people going back and forth having a separate conversation in that chat. One, it's kind of cool that these things become sort of an open chat room / party line for folks, because there is a specific event to which they're all also paying some shared attention to. But the other thing is, that's not a conversation, that's not a way in which you could engage with your fellow audience members in person without really being rude to the people that are the primary, presenters, panel members, whatever. If they're on stage, or behind the table or whatever, and they're giving their talk, they're answering questions from the audience, and you're having a separate side conversation in the same room, man, that gets really rude and distracting. But nobody gives a rip if that's going on in the text chat in YouTube.
Right. It's source material, because you can pull it up as a host.
Yeah.
And it does, you can pick and choose, what's the best question? What's the snarky comment, whatever happens to be.
Yeah. I just find it an interesting dynamic online versus in person. Tim, what do you think?
Oh, I have definitely been that online separate conversation guy.
Well, that was you.
Yeah. I kept finding myself on these Georgetown seminars.
Oh yeah, the Goose seminars.
Oh, I wanted to go. I
Yeah.
wanted to go to them. I never seem to get to them in time.
Well, they used to be right when I had my company staff meeting, so I would only be in part of it. But now we move things, so hopefully I'll be able to get on more of those. But it was really interesting. They would bring up a point there, and someone will say, "Well, that's similar to X," and then that was it. That's now we're off to the races, and we're just chatting away, and yeah, I have been one of those people, and it's basically if you're the type of people that like to do 2 or 3 things at once, you're listening to the presenter, of course, but at the same time, the presenter offered something that was so intriguing that you thought you'd comment about it, and then suddenly there's a separate event going on in the chat about something that was brought up earlier.
Yeah. One of the things that I remember from, this must have been 2018, maybe 2017. There was a Gamma board meeting or a Gamma general membership meeting late summer, early fall. It was the year that John Ward was ousted as the executive director of Gamma. And Tim, I know you've been a Gamma member, for a couple of years. I don't know if you were back then, that you would remember specifically when it was or the circumstances under which it all happened. But they held a general Gamma member meeting, and they did it over Zoom because not everybody was going to be able to get to Columbus, although there was a pretty good chunk of people in Columbus. But they also allowed media members to watch. They allowed us to observe what was going on. Now, we weren't going to be given the metaphorical microphone for any comments as a part of the meeting, but we were able to sit there and observe the whole thing. And one of the things that was really interesting is when they were having some trouble with one of the cameras that they were going to use for the Zoom, they were popping into the chat saying, "Hey, we're coming, we're working on it. We got a camera issue. We're trying to get this fixed so that everybody can see what's going on. As soon as this is ready, we're going to start." But in the meantime, all of us were in the Zoom meeting where the cameras just weren't on yet. Everybody was in the chat. Well, one of the guys, and I think it was one of the dudes from Plaid Hat, just because you've got this Zoom call with, I don't know, 85, 90 gamers sitting in there, just started, "Okay, so you guys are all sitting around a tavern, blah, blah, blah," and suddenly this guy runs in and yells, "Oh, they got me," and falls over with a knife in his back. What do you do? And this like 60 different people all jumped in with this sort of mass dog pile riffing off of an obvious fantasy role-playing setup. And it was a screen. I don't know if anybody cut and pasted that chat to save any of that. I really hope they did, because it was hilarious. And like one of the people's like, "I go rifle his pockets for loose change," as you're bending over the corpse and starting to roll him over to look for his pockets, the city watch walks in and goes, "Hey, get away from that guy. You're coming with us." And this entire sort of separate RPG thing started to unfold while we're waiting for the meeting to start. Meeting starts, and after like 15 minutes, when it starts, the excitement has started to die down and slow down some. Somebody chimes in, like, "Hey, whatever happened to the guy the city watch ran off with?" And this totally separate conversation that like was completely disconnected from anything happening on camera, but was related to this sort of RPG free-for-all that broke out in the chat waiting for the cameras to come on. It was hilarious. It was weird, but it's sort of what you get when you put 60 board gamers in a virtual room together and have this conversation. It was a blast. We got to kick it.
Probably much more productive than the actual Gamma discussion was.
Maybe in this particular case, that actual Gamma discussion was largely based around what's going on with the executive director and renewing the contract and a couple of other things. So there was actual business happening at this specific Gamma meeting. It wasn't a lot of administrative hoo-ha. But it's just the idea that side conversations in plain view of the primary speaker or speakers can take place in an online environment and no one considers it rude or untoward or unbecoming, and in fact frequently encourages them, being the exact opposite of the behavior you would expect in person with all those people in the room for presenting the exact same kind of content. I find an interesting twist of kind of the online paradigm versus the in-person paradigm.
Well, think about it. If you come into the comments. If you come into a live seminar and 20 people out of the 60 are there, you want to say hi to them, but you're being polite. So you sit down, you might wave to them, kind of go, oh, big smile kind of a thing. But you can't get to all of them. And once the seminar starts, you're listening to the seminar. But here you are in a chat room, basically. I mean, what I see, the first 50 comments I see are, people saying hi to each other.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I have disrupted seminars in real life because I have been that guy there as well. And there's definitely socialization to make that not happen. So for good reasons. As I'm teaching, I don't want to see that going on there. But when you're both sides of the podium there. But online, I do think there's a different culture there. And from what I saw, what I see with some of the stuff with Georgetown, I don't think it's a bad thing. It allows people to kind of riff off whatever the speaker was talking about. And these are the kind of sidebar discussions that you would have after the fact if you could chase the people down. But now you've got everybody right there, and you can go have those chats and while the whole conversation is going. So.
Right.
I do think there is immense value to those side conversations. I think they're great to have for a knowledge sharing purpose, as well as just a general socialization and community building purpose. I think they're great. I just, like I said, I find it interesting that in one type of presentation, it's okay to do it. And in another type, it's considered rude and unseemly. So it's something I find interesting. We're around an hour as we are recording this, so we do want to not overtax the audience's time, much less our family's time away from them while we're doing these recordings. So I'm just going to throw it to each of you for some final comments and general thoughts on the ACDC in particular, or digital conventions as a whole, and kind of a wrap-up thought on them. Keith, I'll let you go first. We'll let Tim close this out. Got any parting thoughts or words of wisdom on digital conventions as a whole, or the ACDC in particular, because that's one we just came out of?
Let me start in general. I've been doing the virtual convention since COVID, because of COVID. And I was thrilled when you guys, specifically you and Harold, decided to continue them, because I don't have a big travel budget. Not a lot of places I should go without my wife, and then we're paying for two of us and, or the rest of my family. So it's really, in terms of getting a gaming convention experience, it is, I'm sitting in my office and I have my own food, and I have food requirements. So that's difficult at a convention sometimes. I really can't have a whole lot of pizza. But it's just got all the convenience of, if I get tired, my bed is here. I don't have to go back to the hotel room. But it really is a serious savings of airfare and hotel and food. And for me, that's just, the way where I am in my life now, that's extremely helpful to stay in the community. Do I like conventions? Yes, I do. As you know, live conventions, because I've been down to the ArmChair Dragoons. But in that particular case, it's because it's so convenient to be able to stay with family and then have the location be right there. But that saves the hotel basically, and the train. I take the Amtrak down there, and it's extreme. Amtrak's great. It's extremely cheap and comfortable for long distance rides.
And you get a lot of work done.
And you got a lot of work done. If I had the money, I would absolutely go to see people face to face. It's just breaking bread with people is amazing. Just even if I didn't do any gaming and just watched, but there's always something to do. It's like a tournament for MBT or whatever it was to be, or War 85. It's just I really like the addition that virtual conventions have made to the gaming, the fabric of gaming. Basically, I don't think they should go anywhere. I think they should stay. And also there's another thing. There's access to professional information. You mentioned connections. There's access to professional information that you never get otherwise. And what am I paying? $10 to go, to get a week's worth of fascinating information. How much entertainment for $10?
Yeah. Less than the cost of a game.
Less than the cost of a game. So I don't mean to be money centered about it. It really is about, I can stay in touch with the people I like and with the public, and present stuff that I wouldn't even have an opportunity to present at a live convention unless I bought a table or, that kind of thing. Half of our lives is about, what money do we have and what do we spend it on to keep ourselves sane and entertained? And I think virtual conventions for me has been a lifesaver the last few years, because it's just, I've had so much fun.
Tim, we're going to let you close this out.
All right. Well, I will say that what I have learned from digital conventions is you get out of it what you put into it. I mean, that's probably true for so many different things, but in the past, I've approached these because I had a couple other jobs I was working on. And so I came in there and I was there for the time slot that I needed to be. I got my game done, and then poof, I disappeared.
Yeah.
And my experience with that was it was sure convenient, but I definitely didn't feel like I was in a convention. This year, having more time, I participated particularly in the ArmChair Dragoons in all 3 days. And so I got a chance to chat with some of the people across the 3 days, just like it would have in a regular convention. And I kind of got a chance to grow into, that kind of convention feeling, like we've all had some shared experiences and we're all chatting with the same folks about the same kind of things. And I came out of Sunday like, wow, that was an awesome experience. And I realized that the big difference between that was how much time I was willing to put into this. And I had a much better experience when I came out of it. I kind of got a glimpse of what that could be last year when I was invited to go be on the SD HISCON and online convention. So I did that, and I looked around, and I spent some more time at that than I normally did on online conventions. And I said to myself, if I get more time, I think this could be a really cool thing. And so then I decided that I was going to dedicate myself to this ACDC, put the time in, and I sure felt like I got all the benefits from it when it was over. So the conclusion then that I have learned from doing this for a couple of years now is if you want to put the time in there to kind of grow into that experience, just like you would if you were there in real life, then you can kind of get the same rewards or similar rewards. It won't be exactly the same way, but you can get kind of the similar rewards that you would have gotten from attending all 3 or 4 days of a regular convention. So that's what I have learned so far.
Well, I'm glad it worked out for you. I'm glad that this was, one of your better digital convention experiences, even if it, took you a little trial and error to learn it. But at least we, figured out what works best for you. And again, what works best for you may not be what works best for other people. And that's okay. Like we've all got our different approaches to these things, and that's fine. But I am glad that, you were able to find the best way for you to participate in these things that you wanted to enjoy, and that it, it worked out better for you this year than it has in previous. That's cool. I'm gratified to hear that. So, we still don't know what the fate of the ACDC will be going forward. We have tentative dates set aside for next year, but as I've said, at the, in the happy hour with Gary, but also in a couple of the other, shows and conversations, I need some help for this next year, just because there's several other things that are starting to overlap the planning and preparation for this between Connections Online and Origins deadlines moving earlier, that I need some help with this. So if I'm still a one-man show for next year, it may not happen. If I've got some folks that can help and pitch in and do some additional things, then yeah, sure, there's a really good chance that we are going to continue the ACDCs. This year I was a little concerned with, coming out of the holidays, because registration wasn't as high as I was hoping it would be, but it pretty much hit those targets towards the end. And I think the experience this year was one of the best for most of the attendees compared to the other ACDCs. And so that was largely good. I'm happy with how this one turned out. But again, we got to get some additional people pitching in to help. And this is not Brant saying, hey, Keith, hey, Tim, I need help from you guys. No, I need help from the audience that's listening to this. I need somebody, 1 to 2 people who are willing to step up and handle a bunch of things as a part of improving this going forward. And we've written about that in our various, ACDC follow-up articles and some of the things that we've put out about that. Cool. Guys, thank y'all for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
It was great.
Yeah.
For the rest of the season coming up later, we're going to be talking the Total War series at one point. We've got an episode set aside for talking about the historical style 4X games. We talked about space 4X games last season. We're going to talk about the historical ones coming up. We are going to do an episode just on the different war game awards, not just the CSRs, but there's a bunch of different awards that are given out across the wargaming space, as well as non-war game specific awards that war games are still eligible for, whether it's the Golden Geeks or the Origins Awards or whatever. So we're going to do an episode talking about some of those. Right now, the plan is Brant is back at Gamma Expo this time in February, so we're going to have an episode of whoever I scrounge at Gamma Expo, and we'll angle into a conversation for that. So we're gonna cover a bunch of bases this spring, and hope that we keep you, the audience, entertained, that you keep coming back and seeing us. And then, as usual, a plea for whether it's Spotify or Google's podcast platform or Apple iTunes or wherever, if you get a chance, pop over there, give us a rating, give us a short review or recommendation. The more of those we get, the more likely we are to bubble up in not so much the podcast rankings, but rather the recommendation engine, so that other people see us also. And we hope that other folks get a chance to see us and find us and share us with your friends and yada, yada, yada. So, gentlemen, appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. Audience, thank you for coming back for season 14 here. We'll catch you next time on another episode of Mentioned in Dispatches.